A pacemaker was still transmitting at 2:28 a.m. in her home on February 1st. 8 minutes later, a car appeared on a residential back road 2.5 miles from her home. The drive between those 2 points takes 6 minutes, 2 minutes of margin, the kind of margin you leave when you are not rushing because you planned this. The sheriff confirmed the timing. The FBI confirmed the footage. 1 month later, no one has been arrested. The man who walked Nancy Guthrie to her front door 4 hours before she vanished has not said a single word publicly. Not one statement, not one video, not one appearance beside his wife while her family fell apart on camera. And the ransom notes, the 2 notes that were supposed to explain everything, are attached to a Bitcoin wallet that has never been touched. Not once. Not from the day it was created. A kidnapper who wants money does not build a wallet and leave it empty, which means this was never about the money, which means everything the public was told about what happened to Nancy Guthrie, the framing, the motive, the category of crime, was wrong. Not incomplete. Wrong. Nancy was someone's mother, someone's grandmother, a woman who spent decades building a life quiet enough that her name should never have ended up in a federal investigation. And on the night she disappeared, she may have opened her own front door, because the person standing on the other side said the right name. This is what the evidence shows. This is what the silence confirms. And this is the case the way it has never been told before. Not as a kidnapping, because it never was one. If this story makes you feel anything at all, don't just watch. Subscribe, because ignoring it is how stories like this disappear. The blood was not inside the house. That matters. In a planned abduction, the kind where someone enters a home, moves through it, takes a person from where they sleep, the violence happens inside. The blood was at the front door, and down the driveway. Nancy Guthrie did not die in her bedroom. She made it to her threshold, which means one of 2 things happened. Either the confrontation came to her, someone forced their way in, and the struggle carried them both to the door. Or Nancy walked to that door herself. She unlocked it. She opened it. Because whoever was standing on the other side gave her reason to. Former FBI agent Johnny Grusing reviewed this case and said exactly that. He believes Nancy may have been lured to the door. Not dragged, not carried. Lured. Think about what that requires. An 81-year-old woman does not open her front door at 2 a.m. for a stranger wearing a mask. She opens it for someone connected to a name she trusts. Someone who says, "Annie sent me." Or, "Tommaso asked me to check on you." 7 words. That is all it would take. And Nancy, who loved her daughter, who trusted the people her daughter trusted, would have reached for that door handle. That is the warmth that was used against her. That is the detail that makes this case unbearable. Now look at what was waiting outside. The FBI released doorbell camera footage showing a masked figure on Nancy's porch at 2:12 a.m. The figure is carrying an Ozark Trail backpack. Former FBI agent and CIA officer Tracy Walder examined that footage closely. She identified what appears to be an antenna protruding from the suspect's jacket. 2 possibilities: a walkie-talkie or a signal jammer. If it was a walkie-talkie, there was a second person. Someone staged in a vehicle nearby, waiting for the signal to move. At 2:28 a.m., Nancy's pacemaker disconnected from her iPhone. The signal went out. Add 6 minutes of driving on dark residential streets. 2:34 a.m. The car appeared on the Stradigali ring camera at 2:36 a.m. 2 minutes of margin. 2 minutes to pause at the end of the street, check the mirrors, confirm the road was clear, and pull away. Retired NYPD detective Pat Browen reviewed that footage with his team. His assessment: a Kia Soul. Not a van, not a cargo truck. A Kia Soul. Compact, common, forgettable. The kind of car that does not make a neighbor look up from their window at 2:30 in the morning. That choice was not accidental. Now here is what the signal jammer theory explains. Nancy's Nest camera went offline at 1:47 a.m. Her pacemaker lost its Bluetooth connection at 2:28 a.m. Both devices run on wireless signals. If a jammer was activated near the house as the suspect approached, it would have killed the camera's ability to transmit before it captured a complete recording. The camera did not fail. It was silenced. And Walter made one more observation that this investigation depends on. She does not believe the suspect brought a cell phone to that house. Her reasoning was precise. If he had, investigators would have identified him already through cell tower data. The digital blackout was deliberate. The suspect knew that phones are trackable. He left his behind, or disabled it, before he got anywhere near Nancy's street. Digital forensics expert Heather Barnhart, who worked the Koberger murder case analyzing phone data, reinforced this directly. She said it plainly. Your phone is the silent witness to your life. And then she said something the suspect did not account for. The absence of a signal can be as revealing as the signal itself. If a phone that pings cell towers every few minutes throughout the night goes dark for 3 hours, starting at midnight on February 1st and resuming at dawn, that gap is visible. It is in the tower data right now. Koberger turned off his phone before driving to the victim's house in Moscow, Idaho. He believed the silence would protect him. What he did not understand was the inverse. Investigators mapped the gap. The 3 hours of silence correlated with cell tower data along his route became the prosecution's timeline. The absence was the evidence. If the suspect in Nancy's case, or anyone connected to them, went dark between midnight and 4 a.m. on February 1st, that blackout is already sitting in a database. The FBI does not need to prove where the phone was. They need to prove it was deliberately turned off during the exact window of this crime, and then turned back on after. Now the ransom notes. 2 notes were received in the first week. They were treated as credible by investigators. A Bitcoin wallet was attached. CNN's chief law enforcement analyst John Miller assessed this case at the 1-month mark. A man with former NYPD and FBI credentials who does not speak carelessly, and he said this. And whatever type of crime it started as, things began to go wrong very quickly. Read that sentence again. Whatever type of crime it started as. That is not the language of a kidnapping that went as planned. That is the language of an operation that fractured at the threshold. Something intended as one thing became another in the first 90 seconds. And the ransom notes, received days later, tell the story of what came next. Not a demand from a kidnapper waiting to be paid. A narrative, constructed after the fact, to point investigators toward a financial motive that never existed. Here is why the evidence supports that reading. A functional ransom operation follows a pattern. Contact within 72 hours. A deadline. Proof of life. A method of transfer the kidnapper actually uses. What this operation produced instead? 2 notes, then silence. To a Bitcoin wallet that has had 0 activity since the moment it was created. 0. The FBI set a payment trap. The wallet was never accessed, not through anonymizing technology. Not at all. A kidnapper who wants $3 million does not build a wallet and walk away from it. The wallet was a prop. The notes were misdirection. Written after the confrontation at that door turned into something the plan never accounted for. John Miller put it directly. He raised the possibility that someone crafted the ransom notes after the fact to disguise a home invasion that had already turned violent. Not a kidnapping. A cover story for a kidnapping. And the blood at the front door, not inside the house, not in the bedroom, but at the threshold where Nancy last stood under her own power, is consistent with exactly that. A plan that broke in its first seconds. And a story built around the wreckage to point everyone in the wrong direction. The investigation is not chasing a kidnapper waiting to be paid. The evidence has already made clear what it is chasing. And in Chapter 2, we look at the 2 men whose names belong at the center of this case. One of them talked. One of them has not said a word, and the difference between those two choices tells you more than either man intended. There are two men whose names keep appearing in this case, not because investigators have named them publicly as suspects, but because the evidence keeps pulling in their direction, and because the way each of them has responded to this investigation tells a story all on its own. The first man talked. The second man has not said a single word. Start with the man who talked. Dominic Evans. He went to the New York Times. He sat down with a reporter from one of the most read newspapers in the country and gave them 40 minutes. 40 minutes of denial. He said he had nothing to do with Nancy Guthrie's disappearance. He said he has not heard from investigators since the early days of the case. Now hold both of those facts at the same time. A man whose physical description, his height, his build, his facial hair, matches the FBI's suspect profile gave a major newspaper 40 minutes of denial, and has not heard from the FBI since. There are two ways to read that. The first reading, Evans spoke because he is innocent, because his name was circulating publicly, and he wanted it on record that he had nothing to do with this. The behavior of a man with nothing to hide. In the second reading, Evans spoke because controlling what the public believes about him is strategically valuable, because every word he puts into print becomes part of a narrative he can point to later. The behavior of a man who understands that the story matters as much as the facts. Only the forensic evidence resolves which reading is true, but Evans is in the record now. His words are documented. His timeline is public. And if his account of where he was and what he did on the night of February 1st contradicts anything investigators have already established privately, that contradiction is now locked in. He talked. That is either the most honest thing he could have done, or the most calculated. Now the second man, Tommaso Cioni, Annie Guthrie's husband, Nancy's son-in-law, the last known person to see Nancy Guthrie alive. He walked her to her front door at 9:50 p.m. on the night she disappeared. He touched her gate. He looked directly at her camera. He got back in his car and drove away into the night. And from that moment to this one, he has not said a single word publicly. Not one statement, not one press appearance, not one Instagram post, not one video beside his wife while she stood in front of cameras and begged the world to help find her mother. 30 days, then 40, not one word. Now understand what that silence sits beside. Annie Guthrie cooperated with investigators so fully that they searched her property. They took her car. She gave them access to everything they asked for. Savannah Guthrie offered $1 million of her own money on Instagram. She broke down on camera. She looked into the lens and said her mother may already be dead. And that is what grief with no answers looks like. Cameron spoke directly to whoever took Nancy. On video, his voice steady, his eyes certain, talking to a camera because he had nowhere else to direct the fear. And the man who was the last human being to see Nancy alive, who touched her gate, who looked at her camera, who drove away 4 hours before she was taken, has produced nothing. No tears, no public vigil, no statement through a lawyer, no visible act of solidarity with the family that was breaking apart in front of the entire country. Now, here's what the FBI understands about behavior in cases like this. Innocent family members in abduction cases follow a predictable pattern. They are frantic. They are visible. They make mistakes in their urgency to help. They call the tip line. They knock on neighbors' doors. They organize searches. They put their face on every camera they can find because doing nothing feels like betrayal. Guilty participants follow a different pattern. They cooperate strategically. They answer questions precisely. They avoid voluntary statements that could be used against them later. They hire attorneys early. And they maintain silence, not because they do not care, but because every word is a potential inconsistency. Every public appearance is a video record that a prosecutor can dissect frame by frame. 30 days of silence under the kind of pressure this family was under is not passive. It is a decision, made every single morning. To say nothing when every human instinct is screaming at you to say something, now the detail that should be examined closely. Multiple news organizations reported, through independent law enforcement sources, that the masked suspect visited Nancy Guthrie's porch before February 1st. Not just once. ABC reported it. CBS confirmed it. NBC confirmed it. CNN verified it with a source who stated directly that the masked person was at that doorstep on multiple occasions. The evidence cited was specific. One FBI-released image shows the suspect without a backpack or a holstered item. Another image shows him with both. Same clothing, different equipment, 2 different visits, 2 different days. On February 28th, the Pima County Sheriff's Department called this theory purely speculative. They said the images show the suspect in various stages of attire and that there are no timestamps to prove multiple visits. 4 news organizations. 4 independent law enforcement sources, all reporting the same thing. Then the Sheriff's Department denied it publicly. There are 2 possibilities. The first, ABC, CBS, NBC, and CNN simultaneously fabricated sourced reporting based on false information from 4 separate law enforcement insiders. A coordinated journalistic failure that would be without precedent in modern American media. The second, the sources inside law enforcement are telling the truth, and the public denial is a deliberate strategy, because if the suspect believes investigators can only prove 1 visit, he builds an alibi for 1 night. If he learns they can prove 3 or 4 visits, he must account for 3 or 4 nights, 3 or 4 separate alibis, an exponentially harder defense to construct. Denying the multiple visits publicly, while investigating them privately, keeps the suspect calibrated to a story investigators already know is incomplete. That is not confusion between agencies. That is counterintelligence methodology. Tell the target less than you know. Let them commit to a version of events you can already dismantle, and then dismantle it. Now consider what 30 days of investigation has assembled behind the silence. 2 DNA profiles sent to a lab in Florida. 10,000 hours of footage being processed frame by frame. Cell tower dumps being analyzed date by date, night by night, address by address. Walmart purchase records being cross-referenced against customer databases, because the Ozark Trail backpack that suspect carried is a Walmart exclusive, sold nowhere else. And if that backpack was purchased at a Tucson area Walmart in the weeks before February 1st, the transaction is on file. The buyer's face is on overhead cameras that run continuously at every register and self-checkout station. The vehicle they arrived in is on the parking lot footage, and if they paid with a card, the name is attached. Router logs from Nancy's home and neighboring properties are being examined for devices that appeared in range without connecting. Because a phone can touch a Wi-Fi network, leave a trace in the router log, simply by being nearby. If any device registered to anyone connected to this case appeared in range of Nancy Guthrie's Wi-Fi on January 11th, January 23rd, or February 1st, that data exists on a server somewhere. It does not expire. It does not forget. The FBI relocated its operations to Phoenix, and not a retreat. Phoenix is where federal grand juries convene for cases in the District of Arizona. Phoenix is where the U.S. Attorney's Office builds prosecutions. The shift from Tucson to Phoenix is not the end of an investigation. It is the beginning of a case being built for a courtroom. The public sees a withdrawal. The evidence sees an approach. And somewhere in those 10,000 hours of footage, in a strand of hair on a door frame, in a Wi-Fi ping that no one thought to hide, in a phone that went dark at midnight and came back to life at dawn. The answer to what happened to Nancy Guthrie is already recorded, already logged, already waiting. Nancy tended her garden every morning. She called her daughter every day. She trusted the people her family trusted. And on the last night anyone saw her alive, she may have walked to her own front door because someone said the right name. That is the cruelest part of this. Not the planning, not the execution. The trust that was turned into a weapon. The evidence knows what happened. And the evidence does not wait. You watch this far, so don't walk away now. Subscribe because silence is exactly how cases like this stay buried.